Hi, it's Trace from Purple Cats Quilting. Welcome to the sewing studio today, where we are going to talk about foundation paper piecing as an introductory to the Charlotte's Web pattern. And it's a spider block. You can sign up on RebeccaMayDesigns.com. I'll have that information in the video and on my website on the blog, but you can sign up. I'm in Charlotte's Web Sew Along. We're going to be using Pammy Jane's new Beautiful line, a Halloween line. Lots of fun, cats, ghosts, ravens, lots of color. This sew along really intrigues me because it's very simple, beginner friendly foundation paper piecing. So you go to RebeccaMayDesigns.com and you sign up. You can sign up for the sew along. You can go on Instagram and she's doing the sew along there. It's free to join. The pattern is on her website and it's available for sale there. The first thing I did when I got the pattern is I got a binder from the dollar store. I like to photocopy or print out a copy of the pattern just to have in a binder. Then I also have what I call a working copy, just so I can use it. With foundation paper piecing, we print it onto paper. So I've got several copies here of the block. We print it onto paper. It's called Carol Doakes foundation paper. And it's just a little bit lighter weight. It's not as shiny as regular photocopy paper. Makes it a little bit easier because when you're paper piecing, you're going to pull a paper out at the end of the quilt. It's what helps us get our points nice and even. And I'll show you some samples of some blocks that I've started. So for foundation paper piecing, organization is really the key, especially when we're going to be using so many pretty fabrics. You can do a scrappy quilt and just substitute the colors as she's got there. You can do whatever you want. This quilt will turn out nice no matter what. So for foundation paper piecing, here's the Carol Doakes foundation paper. It's just a lightweight kind of newsprint paper that you can run through your photocopier, print your blocks on, makes it really easy. Another thing that I like is a pressing starch. I like Acorn pressing treatment, or Best Press 2 is something that I use. In foundation paper piecing, we're going to be using a special ruler called the Add a Quarter Plus. I have the 12-inch and the 6-inch here. They have a little bit of a lip here and a fine point. That's why they're called plus. Those are available on my website. For today's pattern, we just need the 6-inch. Some patterns, they're quite large and you do need a larger ruler. Now, if you don't have that ruler and you want to get started, the most important thing is you're going to be trimming your blocks to a 1/4 inch, your seam, and you can actually use, I've got the Tula Pink ruler here. I can see the 1/4 inch mark on it. I could actually use that and I'll show you how I do that. You might need this little seam ripper. Tape. Scotch tape is good because if you do have to pull a seam for whatever reason, your paper will tear, and if you have the Scotch tape, you don't have to reprint it or anything. You can just tape it over and sew that seam again. Another thing that I really like is a Carol Doakes, Sue Daly's glue pen here. What else? We've got our fabric. We've got some beautiful fabric kits using Pammy Jane's fabric, the Beautiful, for this special pattern quilt. And we've got them kitted up very generously for the 60 by 60 inch quilt. Another thing that I also include with our kits this time is a legend. And this is something I suggest you do. It's all part of the getting organized. We need fabric A, fabric B1, B2, C1, C2, fabric D, fabric E1, E2, fabric F1, fabric F2. That can get really confusing in the end because you're using some of the fabrics twice, but to have them all laying out and which one am I needing now, one thing that I do is I like to use paper plates to keep organized. Now, if I were to have this all pre-cut and I want to go to a retreat, I would just drop this in a project box and it's all organized, ready to go. So I'll show you what I did. You're going to print the pattern onto your foundation paper. You cut it in half because there's 2 blocks that will look like that. On the pattern, they've got either fabric B1 or B2. This block, I'm going to use B2. So I've already circled that on there so I know. The other block that I have is actually going to be B1. So I'm getting really organized before I even start. When you're printing out your pattern, it is so important to print at 100%. Drop down on your menu of your printer make sure it doesn't say fit to page, because you're going to not get it exactly the size that you need. That becomes very important if you want to use this template. Now this template comes in the pattern. See, she's got the 1-inch block. You're going to take your 1-inch ruler and make sure that block is exactly 1 inch before you start doing anything. That's really, really important. You want this template to fit into these pattern pieces. So one of the things Sherry has, that's the pattern designer, she has the templates available on her website. You can have a look at that. I wanted to get started right away, so I got some template plastic from the dollar store. My friend Tiffany gave me this. I put my template underneath, and then I took a permanent marker and I made my own template. It makes it really, really easy. You can just use this and cut around, and I'll show you how to do that. I've got several of mine cut out according to the pattern, but one thing that you might want to do, see, I can lay it down like this, and I can kind of fussy cut. Fussy cut is a technique where we try and make the blocks look exactly the same. So let's say I wanted to get these pretty flowers, and maybe that spider, there's a spider on here down by the cauldron. So I'm going to take my template, and because it's clear, I can see through it. That's the beauty of a template. Look at that. I can get that spider right in the middle of my template and cut it out. Then I can take that piece, lay it on top of my fabric again, and get 2 pieces exactly the same. So that template is really, really nice for fussy cutting. You don't need to fussy cut everything, but there's a couple blocks here that I did where I have that spider and the flowers exactly the same. Perfect. And I'll take a close-up picture to show you this later. But isn't that cool? So this fabric, this pattern, they'll be sitting like this when they're made. Where'd my last piece go? So there you can see that I have them exactly the same cut. So we're making a template if you choose, or you can use a paper one. Now I've got my fabric sorted on my plates. So I've got plate A and fabric A, and it's the same as my legend. So you could do that for yours. Then our pre-cut fabrics B1, B2, and I have them all here ready to go. So now when I'm at the sewing machine, I can have them all laid out, and I can just grab the ones that I need. It really helps when we're using so many fabrics and getting that scrappy look to this. So we'll be back in a couple minutes to show you how to do the paper piecing. Now we have our foundation paper piecing. Each block in the quilt is going to use 4 units. So 4 of these pages will make 1 block like this. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 are opposite, 2 are the same, 2 are the same. So 2 and 2. So right now I am using B2 combination. What's really cool about this block looks beautiful, but the way that you really get to see that spider web look is when you see them, let me see here, see them like this. So now this spider web is starting to build here. That's what's going to be really cool. And just think, when you start to quilt that, you can quilt it with lines, just random, like a real spider web. This is something that you can definitely finish yourself on your domestic machine. So we are getting ready to put our paper out. Remember, I have my paper plates with all my colors. I'm laying out, I like to lay mine out before I start. I'm laying out, I have my pattern piece there with the A, which is that template piece. I'm just going to lay it on there so that I can see everything. Now I'm going to go to my paper plates, and it says to use B2, C1, D, E1, and F1. See how easy that is to lay that out so that I can just sew them together. It's nice to be able to just take this board over to the sewing machine and sew them so I don't drop some or get lost. So this next one, that's part of that, is B2. Then I need C2. I need D, and I'm going to keep it, I'm going to change it up a little bit. I think I'll put the little ghosts in there on this one. grab them here. Yeah, this fabric's just so darn cute. I love the colors. Then we have E2, which is green, and F2, which is purple. So that's one unit for one set of blocks. And we'll come back and we'll show you how to paper piece those. Okay, we're going to work with our paper. We've got one of the pieces for the block, and it's the one with the template A. So I've got my template A fabric. I'm going to place it on the wrong side of the paper. Trust me, this works. So the way I like to do that is I like to use a little bit of glue stick. It just helps hold it for the first block. Some people just pin. If you've been doing this a while, you might be able to just hold it and go over and sew. I'm not that confident yet. I have done lots of paper piecing. So now what I'm doing is I'm holding up my paper to make sure that my fabric covers all of the edges. So I'm looking at it from this side and making sure that it covers all the edges to the edge of the block. And that's why that little bit of glue makes it easier. If you're a beginner, you might also choose to cut your template just a little bit bigger to have a little bit of wiggle room. So I've got my paper here. This is the lines that I'm going to sew on and trim around later. On the other side, I have my fabric. So my next piece of fabric is pink, and I'm going to line it up along that edge, and I'm going to flip it over and sew it. So I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine. I'm going to put the needle down. We're going to use a really small stitch. I use 1.75 to 2. You want a smaller stitch for paper piecing because it cuts your paper nice and it makes a really stable seam, and it's easier to rip the paper out later. We back stitch at the end. There we are. We've got that little seam. So now you can finger press. What I like to do, I usually have a little table beside me with my pressing board and my cutting station on it. But for here, we've got our iron here, got a little mini iron here. The reason you need that 1/4 inch ruler is sometimes your seams will be a little bit bigger, but ours is really good. So for the next one, I'm going to go to color C1, which I think was purple. Now, I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to fold it on that line. I'm going to put it on this line and I'm going to fold it back. Look at that. See, I've got a little bit too much fabric. The nice thing about these pieces of fabric is they're all pre-cut, so there's not a lot of waste. I love it. So you can trim that down using that ruler. It's got a little bit of a lip on it. It folds up close to that fold that you just made. You trim it. Now I'm going to take my next piece of fabric and I'm going to lay it on there. I'm going to center it. I'm going to very carefully flip it over, stick it under the machine, back stitch, sew along the line. Take it over to my pressing. Or you can use a Violet Craft seam roller, works really good if you're somewhere where you just want to be doing this, maybe outside or something. You don't have a big station set up. So look at that, starting to look great, isn't it? So again, I'm going to fold the next line, which is for my D fabric. Oh, my seam is a little big, so we've got just enough to have a little bit of wiggle room is what I like. I love wiggle room. So what's my next color? I think it was the dark, the kitties. So I'm going to lay that like that with my edges matching. I'm going to carefully flip it over so it doesn't get misplaced or moved around. Put it under there. Drop my needle down. Again, I always back stitch. I don't want those stitches coming out later, because sometimes these blocks are going to lay around for a while, because I've got a few to make. If I want to make 36 blocks and there's 4 units to each one, that's quite a few blocks. And so they're going to be sitting off to the side of my sewing room unless I get a chance to power sew. So again, I'm folding back on that line, trimming off any excess. cutting my next piece of fabric. That's E1, which is those beautiful little ravens. Put that in. I like paper piecing. I find it very relaxing. I like that it's accurate. I always have a pretty happy outcome. And then for our last unit there, oh, that looks like a 1/4 inch. I think I'm good. Our last unit is actually a square. So again, I'm going to want to use my light on my paper. I'm going to want to make sure that I've got those ends covered, because when you flip it over, you want to be able to have those ends covered. So I'm going to finish sewing this. We'll come back, we'll have a couple units sewed. We'll show you how to sew them together and then how to sew the block. And then we'll be ready to go. So we've got the first of our block made. Now we're going to do the other one that's very simple that attaches to that. So again, I'm doing B2. I'm going to put a little bit of glue stick on the pink one, just on the back, because again, I'm applying it to the back of the paper. And I want to lift it up and make sure I've got it so that it's a 1/4 inch down over that sewing line. And I lift it up like this. I can see the outline when I hold it up to the light to make sure that my fabric is covering all of those seam lines. So that's the first one. I've done it with glue to help it stay, because it does wiggle around, right? Now I've got piece C2. So I'm going to lay it on there, right sides together, right? Just like we sew anything else. Now I'm going to flip it over so I can stitch it on that stitch line. So I'm going to back stitch, go along the seam line, back stitch. I'm going to take it over, give it a little bit of a press. We're going to trim that down. We're going to put our ruler. So I told you I would tell you how to use a regular ruler if you want to get started. So you can take some cardstock, a postcard or whatever, to fold this over. So I don't have the postcard with me right now, but you can use a piece of cardstock or an envelope to fold it over on that line. You fold it down. Now you're going to take your 1/4 inch ruler. These Tula Pink rulers have a nice mark on them. You're going to lay that 1/4 inch line along your fold and you're going to trim it. That's exactly what an add a 1/4 inch ruler does, but because of that lip and everything, it fits up nice and tight. Just makes it a little bit easier. Not necessary, nice to have. So our next piece of fabric we'll lay on there now. And again, I'm always thinking about those seam allowances on the other side, making sure everything is centered. Now, one thing I like about this pattern is that Rebecca May Design, Sherry, the pattern designer, has you pre-cut. One thing I like to do when I get a new pattern, instead of cutting 40 million pieces, I cut enough for 1 or 2 blocks. I make it to make sure I know what I'm doing. Make sure I've cut everything right. I cut it just for one. That's good advice for just about any pattern, to cut enough for 1 block and test your piecing skills and test your accuracy. If you cut everything for all 36 blocks and you've made an error and cut something a little bit shorter than it's supposed, then you've made that error a whole bunch of times. If you just make 1 block and you find, oh, this works just great, I know what I'm doing, go ahead, cut them all, lay them in your plates. But I always start with just 1 to make sure that I'm doing it the way that it turns out the way it's supposed to. So that's the kind of sewer I am. So I'm going to trim that down. We always trim off that extra seam allowance. There's always just a little bit of wiggle room there. So 1/4 inch seam. We lay our fabric on there. Oh, it's so cute. Look at the little ghost shows up. Right sides together. So when I'm sewing, I'm usually talking to myself in my head. Oh, I know what I was going to say. When you're cutting, she has all her pieces cut exactly so they fit here. There's no waste. If I have a little bit of extra fabric, I'm going to cut mine to maybe just a little bit bigger. Because I'm kind of a beginner, kind of a crazy quilter, I like to have that little bit of wiggle room. So if it says cut 3 3/4, I sometimes cut 4, just so I have a little bit more. If you buy a kit from Purple Cat's Quilting, we always kit very generously. Again, making that test block is a really good way to find out what you like, what technique you like, how you want it. You make one test block to make sure that it works. So now I've got this last piece that's a 2.5 inch square. I'm going to lay it on there, right sides together. I'm going to check that it's going to cover all of that bottom piece there. That's what's important. If you sew and you flip it over and press it and you hold it up and it hasn't covered that fabric, that's where this thing comes into play. And you're going to have to rip that seam carefully, tape it maybe, and redo it. Not a big deal, easy to do, easy to fix. So, sometimes I even put a little spray on there just to make it nice. Now our next step, so I'm lifting it up, I'm making sure all my seam lines are there. Now I'm going to trim this block along. These are the sewing lines, this is the cutting line. Sewing line, cutting line, right? I'm cutting out the outside line. If you cut the other one, you will be sad and you'll have to redo it. So you're cutting, you're trimming. I'm using a ruler cutter. I'm trimming along the outside. I like to use a ruler. You get a nice straight line. Now she also has her points cut off. Makes it a little bit easier to match up later. So I could do that. Oh, I got everything. I got it all. So I'm going to do that with this one. We'll come back and I'll show you how to put them together. Okay, I've got my 2 pieces. I've trimmed them. They worked. Yay! So now I have to look on the back. There's my seam line. This one is going to go there. Okay? So there's a seam line on both. What I like to do is take this corner, put my pin in, run it through to that corner on the other side and run it through. Then I know that if I drop my needle down there, it's going to be a good fit. So I'm going to do that on this side. And you know, this is the kind of pattern that you could easily go into your stash. I'm sure you have black and pink and orange and purple. So now I'm going to line it up. I'm used to sewing with my knee bar, so I'm going to back stitch the edge. I'm going to sew along that sew line and ease it in. And I'm going to pull my pin right at the end. Ooh, look at that. So I can take it over to the pressing station, probably press that open. And now it's time to join these together. So we're just going to go back to this little tray here. We're going to talk about how we do our seams. We are going to use pins again. And I'm kind of pin crazy. So opposites, I've made 2 of each colorway. This is how they're going to go together for the block. So we're going to first sew one to the next, like this, and like this. So we're going to sew these guys here. So they have lots of points that we want to match. And I actually had these together, but I took them apart so I could show you how. Again, I'm going to use my pins exactly the same way. And I am going to pin at each little intersection there. Not necessary, but I do it. I like it because it does, this paper piecing really allows us to have some precision piecing. I mean, this is a fun kind of pattern, and spider webs are organic, so they're never perfect. But if I can, I like to get my seams to match. It doesn't always work, but I do my best. So I'm matching each point. I know some people who use like a seam glue to do this. I like pins. All right. We're gonna match the points. Remember, this one's been sewed together a little bit, but we're gonna use it for demo. It's a pretty block. We sew along that seam now. As I get to that pin, I pull it out. That's why I've got them off to the right. I'm right-handed. I pull them out. I sew a bit more. Pull. A little bit more. Usually I stitch needle down. I want to go over those pins. This makes your machine very cranky. And I sew to the end, back stitch. All right, how'd we do? Not too bad, hey? That is the beauty of paper piecing. Not perfect, but I'll go press that out. It'll be good. So we are going to sew the other half just like that, using those points and doing it. Then we're going to take them together, do exactly the same thing along there. We've got our big, beautiful block for our Charlotte's Web quilt. So, Purple Cats Quilting, Rimbey, Alberta. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, check out our website, and our other YouTube channel. Thank you.